I welcome you all to this interactive session on the treatment of COVID-19 coronavirus infection. I am Dr. Sharda, Associate Professor, Chettinad Hospital and Research Institute, and I'll be moderating this session. We have been facing this pandemic for nearly 4 to 6 months, and yet we find it very difficult to get an appropriate medication for the treatment of COVID-19 infection. In this session, we are trying to discuss and understand the treatment options available for managing COVID-19 infection and the future directions. I welcome Dr. Arun Kumar, Professor of Pharmacology and Vice Principal of Chettinad Hospital and Research Institute, to share his knowledge and clarify our doubts on the treatment of COVID-19. We shall now start the session. Sir, time and again we had been facing many new infections. Why is that the treatment of COVID-19 very difficult?
Generally, bacterial infections are sort of easy to treat compared to viral infections. If you look at the bacterial organisms, they are unicellular, but then they are structurally and functionally well characterized. You have a cell wall which is well defined, cytoplasm, proteins, ribosomes, endoplasmic reticulums, nucleic material, all these things are well characterized in bacteria, and their metabolism is unique, and again well functional metabolic processes are available in bacteria. Hence, it is always easy to design a drug that targets bacteria, because you can select either the bacterial cell wall or the bacterial ribosomes or bacterial proteins or bacterial genetic sequence to target, and you can try to eliminate bacteria. Whereas if you look at the viruses, they are a little primitive in nature. Though they retain the life, they still need to depend on human cells or host cells to survive and to replicate. They depend on the human genome, human metabolism, human ribosomes to replicate and to cause the infections, and hence it's a little difficult to target viral proteins or viral genetic sequences to, when you're developing a drug, it's a little difficult. Now, when you take COVID-19, the new drug development for any disease or for any microbial infection is always tough, because the natural life cycle of a new drug development is going to have about 5 years to 10 years. Now we have come to know about this COVID-19 virus, this novel coronavirus, only for 6 months to 8 months, and hence we cannot expect the scientists to develop a new drug in a very short span of 6 months to 8 months. So to overcome this hurdle in the new drug development for COVID-19 infection, the people are trying, scientists are trying to reposition and repurpose the already available medications against COVID-19.
Yes, sir, I do agree that the treatment of viral infections are difficult in general. Sir, can you brief us about repurposing or repositioning of drugs for the treatment of COVID-19?
Well, repositioning or repurposing of old medications, it is nothing but an effort that you make to explore the new indications or new uses for drugs which are already approved for various other indications. We have a lot of classical examples of drugs or medications which went for this repurposing or repositioning. For example, metformin. Metformin, we know that it is a drug approved for diabetes mellitus, and it's one of the drugs of choice in the treatment of diabetes mellitus. But people have repositioned this medication in the treatment of polycystic ovarian syndrome with a lot of experience and clinical experience and the usefulness that they have observed with metformin. This drug is now one of the candidates successfully getting used for polycystic ovarian syndrome. Similarly, we can think of bromocriptine. Bromocriptine is an ergot alkaloid which was approved for hyperprolactinemia, related infertility and galactorrhea, and people have repurposed it in the treatment of diabetes mellitus. Now, bromocriptine is one of the approved medications in the treatment of diabetes mellitus. It is one of the centrally acting anti-diabetic medications. This is again was possible due to the experiments they have conducted to reposition or repurpose an already approved medication in a new indication. Like that, people are trying to explore the possibility of using already approved antiviral medications and immunomodulators in the treatment of COVID-19. And I would like to say that presently there is not even a single drug which has been officially approved by any government agencies for COVID-19 infection. Whatever drugs we are using now is only an effort that we put in to repurpose or reposition already approved medications in COVID-19.
Fine, sir. We now understand the purpose of repurposing drugs. Can you elaborate the treatment options currently available and tried by doctors in patients suffering from COVID-19 infection?
The potential drugs that are tried in the treatment of COVID-19, we can classify them broadly into different categories. The first one are antiviral drugs. The second one, immunomodulatory drugs, or drugs that manipulate the immunity in favor of the host and targeting the viral organisms. And people are trying to develop vaccines, and people are trying to find out medications that will help in the post-exposure prophylaxis against COVID-19. And then people are again trying to think of the usefulness of anticoagulants and antithrombotics in COVID-19. So to classify them, the potential medications in COVID-19, we have 5 classes of medications. Number 1, antiviral medications. Number 2, immunomodulating agents. Number 3, vaccine candidates. Number 4, antithrombotic and anticoagulant medications which can be potentially useful in COVID-19, and then drugs that are focusing on post-exposure prophylaxis. These are the 5 categories of medications people are exploring in COVID-19 infection.
Is it, sir? Most of us were of the opinion that antiviral drugs would be the prime treatment option in treating COVID-19 infection. Surprising to know that they are even trying anticoagulants in the management of COVID. What is the rationale for considering anticoagulants in COVID, sir?
Well, talking about the usefulness of anticoagulants and antithrombotic agents in COVID-19, it all started with the autopsy findings we have got from patients who died of COVID-19. People who died of severe COVID-19 infections with the systemic inflammatory response and other complications, they have done autopsy in Western countries, especially countries like Italy, Spain and other Western countries. These findings have revealed that those patients, at least some of them or many of them, had problems related to coagulopathies. There were findings related to disseminated intravascular coagulation, stroke, deep venous thrombosis, pulmonary thromboembolism. So this prompted them to form a hypothesis that at least in severe COVID-19 infections, there is a possibility that the patients can go for coagulopathies. So the doctors or scientists are thinking how effectively we can use anticoagulants to handle this situation. And based on these findings and the experience that the doctors had in United States, the Center for Disease Control, CDC, has issued a guidance to help the doctors on choosing or recommending anticoagulants and antithrombotics. Presently, the Center for Disease Control doesn't give a blanket recommendation for use of anticoagulants in all patients of COVID-19 infection. The recommendation is only specific for people who have the risk of developing thromboembolic episodes, or people who already have thromboembolic complications or comorbidities. Only in these sets of patients, the Center for Disease Control is recommending the use of anticoagulants. They have advised us to use heparin, traditional unfractionated heparin or low molecular weight heparin in people who are at the risk of developing thromboembolic complications, or people who are already having thromboembolic comorbid conditions. And CDC has also recommended the use of warfarin in people who are already on warfarin, but only point is that we need to optimize the dose by checking the INR or prothrombin time or partial thromboplastin time. We need to check these parameters, and then we need to trim and augment or refine the dose of warfarin in those patients.
So you mean to say anticoagulants do have a role in some patients with COVID? So the entire world is looking forward for a promising vaccine for COVID-19. Can you elaborate on the vaccine development for COVID?
With regard to the vaccine development status for COVID-19, for any vaccine development program, we need the genomic sequence of that particular organism, because this genomic structure will help the scientists to develop the antigens or proteins or peptides that can be taken up for clinical and preclinical development. Now this novel coronavirus, we have the complete genome characterized and it is made available in the public domain by various scientists. Starting from the countries like China and US, and I think even for India the genomic sequence is available in public domain. And from January 2020 we have this data on the genomic sequence of this COVID-19 virus. Now scientists have taken that information and are trying to design peptides and antigens, and right now if you look at it, there are more than 80 vaccine candidates. 80 vaccine candidates are under different developmental stages. Few of them are in preclinical stage, few of them are in vitro stage, and few of them are in clinical development stage. Countries like UK, China and US, in many countries these vaccine trials are going on, and we can hope that down the line in about 6 months to 1 year we can have some vaccine which will be useful in human beings against this novel coronavirus. There are different types of vaccines that people are focusing to develop. Live vaccines, killed or inactive vaccines, then subunit vaccines, and then vaccine candidates added with adjuvants. Now we know what is a live vaccine, killed vaccine and subunit vaccine. Live vaccine, we know that oral polio vaccine is a classical example where the virus is taken and then repeated cultures are being done, and then getting a virulent strain and then using it to induce immunity. Now for coronavirus, this novel coronavirus, they are not only taking this novel coronavirus for vaccine development, they are also taking all related respiratory viruses and other related coronaviruses to develop vaccines. Again, killed vaccines, they inactivate the vaccine, inactivate the virus, and then they inject it. Like we have injectable polio vaccine, they again try to develop by inactivating the viruses and then injecting it and then trying to induce immunity. These are inactive vaccines or killed vaccines. Subunit vaccines, the example that we already know is hepatitis B vaccine. We have taken the antigen, surface antigen of the hepatitis B virus, and we have successfully made it to a vaccine candidate, and we are routinely getting this hepatitis B injection nowadays. Like that here also in COVID vaccine program, with the available genomic sequence, the scientists have taken up potential antigens, potential peptides, proteins which can induce a good amount of immunity in human beings. They have taken and they are experimenting in preclinical and clinical studies to make them available for human beings. Now the problem with the vaccines is that their immunogenicity is not that great. It's very difficult to find a vaccine, maybe a live vaccine, maybe a killed vaccine, maybe a subunit vaccine which can induce good amount of immunity. It's a problem. So to overcome that problem, the scientists are adding adjuvants along with these vaccine candidates, and many of these vaccine candidates are now in trial stage along with the adjuvants. What are the adjuvants that we can think of to induce immunity? Basically, adjuvants are agents that will stimulate immunity, both B cell and T cell immunity. So instead of giving vaccines alone, because they induce only very minimal immunity, if we add adjuvants along with the vaccines, we can induce good amount of immunity. And for COVID-19 vaccine development, they are using an adjuvant called CpG. CpG is an oligonucleotide which has cytosine and guanine in it, and it's a very known immunostimulant. When we inject it, it goes and binds with toll-like receptors. If you take respiratory epithelium, there are these toll-like receptors situated, and if these receptors are stimulated, it induces specific B cell and T cell immunity that offer protection against respiratory infections. So what scientists have been trying to do is that they are combining vaccines with adjuvants so that the immunogenicity of vaccines can be augmented by these adjuvant candidates, especially the CpG, which is an oligonucleotide consisting of cytosine and guanine.
Fine, sir. Let's hope to get a successful COVID vaccine in 2020. Can you enlighten us about the antiviral drugs currently available for the treatment of COVID?
The so-called antiviral medications against COVID-19, we can classify them into two: specific antiviral drugs and then non-specific antiviral drugs. The specific antiviral medications are already approved for their antiviral property, and they are already used against a variety of viral infections. whereas non-specific antiviral medications are other medications. They are antibiotics, or they are in any other condition that they were approved, but now they are trying to explore their usefulness against COVID-19. With regard to specific antiviral medications, we have at least 4 or 5 that are found to be useful in COVID-19. Remdesivir. Remdesivir is a very promising candidate against COVID-19. And then we have Favipiravir, a drug which is available in Japan for flu viral infections. And then Ribavirin, which is available, which is for decades against a variety of DNA and RNA viruses. We have been using Ribavirin. And then antiretroviral medications like Lopinavir and Ritonavir combination, and then Darunavir and Cobicistat combinations. So these are some of the specific antiviral medications. Maybe in future we can know whether they are really useful in COVID-19 or not. Now we need to know more about Remdesivir because it's one of the very promising candidates that is going to be useful in COVID-19. Now this Remdesivir is actually developed by a company in US called Gilead Life Sciences. They developed it against Ebola virus. Before 3-4 years we had Ebola viral outbreak. At that time they developed this drug Remdesivir, but then was not found to be very promising, and this was under cold storage. Now the company has taken up again, and Gilead Life Sciences is trying to develop it against COVID. A lot of multinational trials are going on. In US they have seen that the drug is giving excellent results when the outcome is compared with placebo in terms of reduction in the viral load, and in terms of improvement in the clinical outcomes. This drug was really promising in COVID, especially people who have severe disease and who have significant respiratory compromise. Remdesivir was found to be promising. And based on the intermittent results of the clinical trials in US, it was approved for emergency use. I think in the first week of May 2020, the Food and Drugs Administration of United States of America has given emergency use authorization. So it means that the physicians who are coming across patients with severe respiratory compromise and severe infection with COVID-19, they can use Remdesivir. We'll also give you the dose of Remdesivir. The duration of treatment is for 10 days. On day 1, 400 milligrams given intravenously, slow intravenous infusion, 30 minutes to 90 minutes you got to give this Remdesivir, and from day 2 to day 10 we have to give 200 milligrams as intravenous infusion. And it's reasonably well tolerated by the patients in the clinical trials, though it gives some hypersensitivity reactions and few people with elevated liver enzymes, meaning that it can cause hepatotoxicity. Otherwise I think it's one of the potential drugs that can be approved for the use of COVID-19 infection.
That's wonderful, sir. Remdesivir, a drug not effective in Ebola, proves to be of use in COVID. Sir, can you share the role of other antiviral drugs in COVID?
Lopinavir and Ritonavir combination, it's a known combination that is used in HIV AIDS condition. These drugs, both of them are protease inhibitors. Protease is an enzyme which helps in the viral assembly. When the virus is going to multiply, the proteins are cleaved and then well shaped to form the viral particle. It's called a viral assembly. For that, this enzyme protease is very important. And this Lopinavir and Ritonavir combination is usually used at the dose of 400 mg of Lopinavir and 100 mg of Ritonavir. It's used in HIV AIDS. Same dose for about 14 days they have tried in COVID-19. The results are contradicting, but then people have observed a few positive outcome with regard to Lopinavir and Ritonavir, and there are physicians who are trying this combination in COVID-19 even now. The other drug is Favipiravir. Favipiravir, like I said, it's approved in Japan for viral flu-like infections, all types of flu infections in Japan. It's a RNA polymerase inhibitor, and people are trying to evaluate its usefulness in COVID-19. Even in India, the trial is being currently taken up to develop this drug to check whether it is useful in COVID-19 or not. The other antiviral medication is Ribavirin. Ribavirin is a broad spectrum antiviral medication. It's approved in variety of DNA and RNA viral infections, and there are doctors who are using ribavirin against COVID-19, and few outcomes they have observed it is positive. Maybe we'll have to really wait to get other outcomes, a lot of research data before we conclude whether these medications are useful or not.
That sounds good. Multi-drug therapy targeting the various proteins of corona simultaneously. Are there any non-specific antiviral drugs experimented in COVID?
The non-specific antiviral agents, we have few medications like azithromycin. We know that azithromycin is a macrolide antibiotic, broad spectrum antibiotic having action against a lot of gram-positive and gram-negative organisms. They found out that azithromycin in the in vitro experiments has got anti-COVID activity, and also azithromycin to have immunomodulatory activity. And they have attempted to combine it with hydroxychloroquine, especially in a France trial, and again in China they have done it. They have seen promising results, but then then the regulatory agencies are skeptical about its usefulness in COVID-19. So it's not yet approved against COVID-19, but then it's again an antibiotic found to be having antiviral activity against COVID-19, azithromycin. The dose is 500 milligrams once daily for 5 days. They have given it in France. The other non-specific antiviral medication is cyclisonide. Cyclisonide is a corticosteroid. It is given inhalationally. It's useful in people with asthma, COPD and respiratory problems. They have found out in vitro experiments cyclisonide to have anti-COVID activity, and currently a trial is being taken up in Korea. They are exploring a combination of hydroxychloroquine and cyclisonide given inhalationally in the treatment of COVID-19. Now the cyclisonide can be immunomodulator and antiviral in COVID-19. They found out a lot of anti-helminthic medications as useful candidates in COVID-19. Drugs like ivermectin, drugs like nitazoxanide and niclosamide. Ivermectin, we know that it's useful in filariasis and strongyloidosis. Nitazoxanide is useful in tapeworm infestation, and niclosamide is useful in cryptosporidium and giardiasis. And these anti-helminthic medications are found to be having in vitro anti-COVID activity, and currently research is being taken up. Clinical trials are under progress to check whether they are useful in COVID-19 or not. Though we are classifying them as non-specific antiviral agents, we really need to see whether they are going to be useful in COVID-19 or not.
Sir, we clearly understand that a wide variety of other antimicrobial agents and corticosteroids are also tried in COVID. Can you justify the role of immunomodulators in COVID?
Immunomodulators, these are medications, they modulate the immunity like the name says. They stimulate some immune domains or suppress a few other immune domains. They ultimately try to offer protection against antigens or microbes. The most commonly explored or tried immunomodulators are chloroquine and hydroxychloroquine. We know that both these medications are anti-malarial agents, and they have immunomodulatory activity. They have been used in a lot of autoimmune diseases like rheumatoid arthritis, systemic lupus and psoriasis. We have years of experience with these medications as immunomodulatory agents. Now hydroxychloroquine is tried alone or in combination with azithromycin. Chloroquine is given alone, by doctors, especially from China. Even in India, doctors have used. France, US, Italy, many countries have used these medications to try to see whether they are useful in COVID-19. Again, the results are conflicting. These medications are not approved by any government agency across the globe that they are useful in COVID-19. Now, in addition to the immunomodulatory activity, both the medications were also found to have in vitro anti-COVID activity. That's again promising. Why they have getting used in COVID-19. Now, chloroquine in addition has got one more property. Now when we see the pathophysiology of COVID-19 infection in human beings, the virus has to penetrate the respiratory epithelial cell. For that it needs to bind to a receptor called ACE2. ACE2 is nothing but angiotensin converting enzyme 2 receptor. It is present in the respiratory tract epithelial cells. The virus binds to this ACE2 and then it penetrates the epithelial cell and then it infects. Now chloroquine has got inhibitory activity against this angiotensin converting enzyme 2, so that viral binding to this receptor is going to come down, and the viral penetration into the respiratory epithelium will also come down. So people are anticipating that are assuming that chloroquine has got potential to be anti-COVID agent because it has immunomodulatory activity, it has antiviral activity, and it has this inhibitory activity against angiotensin converting enzyme 2 receptor in the respiratory epithelium.
So a potential anti-malarial drug chloroquine and its derivative hydroxychloroquine can be promising in COVID. Can you share the dose and duration of therapy with hydroxychloroquine in COVID?
With regard to the dose and duration of treatment with the chloroquine, what I am going to say now is from the ICMR guidelines, and the same is followed by different countries also. When we have a patient with confirmed COVID-19 infection, we want to give treatment with hydroxychloroquine. The usual duration of treatment is 5 days. On day 1, we have to give 400 milligrams 2 times a day, and then from day 2 to day 5, the remaining 4 days, we have to give 200 milligrams 2 times a day. And not only for treatment of COVID-19, hydroxychloroquine is recommended, but also it is recommended for giving prophylaxis against COVID-19. Especially 2 sets of population it is recommended. One is healthcare workers like doctors and nurses who are handling COVID-19 patients. There is a recommendation to use hydroxychloroquine. The other set of population is that household contacts, asymptomatic household contacts of known COVID-19 patients. They are recommending prophylaxis with hydroxychloroquine. The dose recommended in healthcare workers is, on day 1 we have to give 400 milligrams 2 times a day, and then every week for 7 weeks 400 milligrams. So on day 1, I again repeat, on day 1 400 milligrams 2 times a day, and then weekly once with a 400 milligram dose for 7 weeks. It's for healthcare workers, recommended as a prophylaxis against COVID-19. In case of household contacts, the duration is little less. On day 1 we have to give 400 milligrams 2 times a day, and then weekly once for 3 weeks. But then there is a word of caution for hydroxychloroquine. It has the potential to increase QT interval and can give arrhythmia and can be fatal if we have arrhythmogenic potential already. So without getting advice, without getting some clinical evaluation and ECG evaluation, it's not nice to take hydroxychloroquine either as a prophylactic agent or as a therapeutic agent in COVID-19, because there are cases reported with mortality and morbidity with hydroxychloroquine. So we need to be careful when we are advising somebody with hydroxychloroquine.
So it's now clear that hydroxychloroquine can even be used as a prophylaxis by healthcare workers. Apart from hydroxychloroquine, are there any other immunomodulatory agents for the treatment of COVID?
The doctors are trying a variety of immunomodulatory agents against COVID-19 because they have seen that there is a sudden and severe cytokine release happening in people with severe COVID-19 infection. These patients are doing well all along, but then suddenly they have this cytokine release causing severe inflammatory compromise, and mortality and morbidity happens. So the doctors are trying to find out whether potential cytokine inhibitors or interleukin inhibitors can be useful in COVID-19. It is only to focus on the systemic severe inflammatory response they get for this viral infection. In that context, they are trying interleukin 6 inhibitors. The biological agents, monoclonal antibodies approved for rheumatoid arthritis and other autoimmune diseases like tocilizumab, then sarilumab. These two are interleukin 6 antagonists. They are monoclonal antibodies, humanized monoclonal antibodies against interleukin 6, and in few patients, even in India, they have used these two medications, tocilizumab and then sarilumab. The other cytokine antagonist is anakinra. It is interleukin 1 inhibitor. It is again approved in rheumatoid arthritis, and people are trying to evaluate its potential in COVID-19. So they're trying to explore the possibility of number of medications, different mechanisms, and trying to reposition these medications against COVID-19.
So monoclonal antibodies also have a role. So what is the role of BCG vaccine in COVID-19?
BCG vaccine and COVID-19 infection. They have observed, the epidemiologists have observed, and doctors have been observing that the severity of COVID-19 infection, the morbidity and mortality of COVID-19 infection is little low in countries where BCG vaccination is being advised for decades in children. That's why even in India we see the infections are increasing, but then the mortality and morbidity is little low compared to the trend that we observe in Western countries like Italy and Spain and UK and US. One of the reasons they are assuming, or the hypothesis that they think of this phenomenon, is that BCG vaccine would have offered immune protection against many of the respiratory infections. BCG is offering protection against severe TB infection. It's offering protection against many of the respiratory infections, including the bacterial and viral infections, at least offering protection against severe infections. These are the benefits which are already established for BCG vaccine. And this again, they are attributing it for the low mortality and morbidity observed in these developing countries where BCG vaccine is routinely advised. So there are trials currently in progress evaluating the usefulness of BCG vaccine in reducing the incidence of COVID-19 and in reducing the mortality and morbidity in COVID-19 infection. Many countries have taken up this task of exploring BCG vaccine in COVID-19. In India also there is a proposal with NIRT, National Institute for Research in Tuberculosis. They are trying to explore its usefulness in COVID-19. So we are not very sure whether it is useful or not, scientifically and statistically, but then seems to be a promising concept, attempting to use BCG against COVID-19.
You mean to say the Indian population is relatively resistant to the infection and complications of COVID due to the immunity we acquired from the BCG vaccination in our childhood. Sir, finally, can you tell us the role of plasma therapy in COVID-19 infection?
Plasma therapy. See, the hypothesis is that any infection in human beings, once they recover from the infection, their plasma will have immunoglobulins or antibodies which will act against that particular organism which caused infection. So what they are trying to do is that people who are infected with COVID-19, they recovered, or sort of recovering from that infection. We're going to bleed those patients, process it, and get the plasma which will be having rich amount of immunoglobulins or antibodies. Now these can be given to other patients who have COVID-19 infection. Now people are trying to use it as a research protocol. Patients with severe COVID-19 infection, severe respiratory compromise, severe systemic inflammatory response for COVID-19, they are trying to advocate as a research to find out whether this plasma infusion is useful in reducing the severity or not. Now it's not approved as a treatment yet by any of the government agencies across the globe, because they say that the evidences they need to accumulate more to really advise this plasma therapy in COVID-19 infection. Now this sort of plasma therapy is called convalescent plasma therapy, may be promising, but we are not very sure as of now.
Thank you very much, sir, for giving a detailed description of the various therapeutic options explored in COVID-19. You made it very clear that no drug has been officially approved so far for the treatment of COVID. Though you have made a remark that remdesivir has been recommended in USA for emergency use. Thank you all for watching this interactive session on the treatment of COVID-19 by the Department of Pharmacology, Chettinad Hospital and Research Institute.